Hello and welcome to our weekly Meet and Expect podcast number 10. We are Scandiweb, the company that is providing e-commerce solutions and services to worldwide brands. So to check out more, you can check out our page, scandiweb.com, and get familiar with our products, solutions, and services. Who I am? I'm your host, Harry. At the moment, I'm a full-time developer, I'm a full-time mentor, and I'm teaching developers skills, showing them first ropes, how to become a professionals. Today we have a special guest. His name is Steve McConnell. He has pursued a career in the desktop software industry, working at Microsoft, Boeing, and many other companies. He's also an author of many well-known software books like Software Estimation, which we also will talk about today. So this will be a very interesting topic. So welcome, Steve. Nice to meet you. I'm glad you are here.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So today we're going to talk about agile practices and remote work. We will also talk about software estimation and how we can improve our services and project management.
Yep, sound like terrific topics.
Why?
Well, estimation's been one of my favorite topics for my whole career, and Agile, of course, has been a really important topic for about 20 years now. So both important and certainly both have some interesting implications for outsourced work or that kind of thing. So should be an interesting conversation.
Yes. As we can see, the world has been changed for past year. So we have this COVID case where everybody was put on complete, like 100% remote work, and mostly the communication basically goes through video calls, Slack messages, and any communicational methods that are not person to person as we usually do. There's a topic I want to talk about today. These are agile principles and issues with modern management, and how we can apply these agile principles in the current situation. So I think everybody knows what is Agile Manifesto. That's the, generally speaking, set of ideas that are usually mentioned in developer world, and also like the main, I think, main revenue stream for many well-known consultants.
Yes, definitely.
So the main point here is that problems with software, they, at the end of the day, at the end of the month, they are never technical. So they are always financial, and usually the problems rise from management. It's not like developers couldn't write code, but the problem is that majority of times developers, they misestimate or overestimate, underestimate things. So, and the most pitfalls, I think, happen in management. So here I want to ask a question about the history and the management techniques used in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a book, Software Estimation, Best Practice, Software Estimation, Demystifying the Blackout.
That's
right.
That
was the correct name. So the book is written in 2006.
Right.
Time has been passed.
Yes. Yeah.
So what has been changed, and what are your thoughts at the moment?
Yeah. So a lot has changed since 2006. I think we could spend our whole time together talking about what has changed and what hasn't changed. But I do think in 2006, Agile practices were still fairly new. In 2006, the most common Agile practice was extreme programming. Today I think Scrum is very clearly the most common Agile practice, but back then it was a little bit of Scrum and much more extreme programming. We really weren't, I mean, some people were talking about Kanban. Of course, no one was talking about SAFe in 2006. There was a little bit of conversation about lean, but not very much, not as much as it is today. So I think in 2006, there was a lot of interest in Agile practices, but there was also still a very strong waterfall flavor really across the board, in the entire software industry. I'm not going to say Agile was the exception. It really wasn't the exception. I think, most companies were at least trying it, but I mean, I think that was largely the extent of it in 2006, was that companies were trying it. That we were, in terms of innovation adoption sequence, or Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, we were still very much in the early adopter phase in 2006. And so the challenge for estimation at that time was still mostly taking a fairly fixed feature set and trying to estimate how much it would cost and how long it would take. And I mean, that really is, whenever we're talking about estimation, we really are pretty much talking about fixing two of the corners on the triangle of cost, or of effort or cost, functionality, and schedule, and estimating whatever's going to happen with the third one. And so I think as time has gone by, it's now 15 years after 2006, what we see today is pretty different. The vast majority of companies are doing at least something with Agile practices. From where we sit, it looks like the majority of companies are significantly doing, or mostly doing, Agile practices. And really the nature of the development has shifted quite a bit from trying to nail down a specific fixed feature set and then estimate how long it's going to take or how much it's going to cost. And now I think the focus is mostly on having a budget and estimating. Basically, I think the focus in Agile projects tends to be more estimating, well, how quickly can we work? How much functionality can we produce? In other words, what's the velocity of our team? And so we still definitely have situations where we're trying to estimate how much functionality can we get done by a particular release date, for example. It's still amazing to me how many companies are still on some kind of a seasonal development schedule where they need to be ready for the holiday sales season around Christmas. Lots of games and cell phone apps and cell phone firmware is really strongly tied to that annual holiday sales cycle. Computer sales very strongly in the US anyway, very much tied to the back to school schedule. An awful lot of laptops are sold in the late summer when kids are starting to go to college. And so there's some seasonality to that business. For other kinds of games, any game that's tied to a sport, for example, it tends to be tied very strongly to whatever the season is for that sport. So we definitely still have many cases where it's important to estimate, are we going to be done by the release date? Do we need to do something different in order to be complete or to have a coherent product by the release date? But that's all kind of like for software that gets distributed in big chunks. We've also got this huge category of software that's delivered online, software as a service. And so that really is not about estimating when we're going to be done. It's really more about just saying, how much are we going to be done with by a particular time? And that I think is mainly more used for, it's not so much used for market announcements or that kind of thing. I think it's more used for capacity planning internally in companies where they're just trying to figure out, how many people do we need on the team? Do we need to hire more? Do we have the right kind of specialists? for all the discussion about developer tests, we still see most organizations having some number of test specialists. So, do we have the right number of developers? Do we have the right number of testers? Do we have the right number of product owners? So we still see estimation used for that kind of issue.
Okay, as I mentioned previously, that these kind of problems, at the end of the day, they are financial. But what was management then, before 2006? Because between this period when Agile Manifesto was released, there are many significant events. Like, for example, in 1990s to 2001, you in USA, you had all this so-called dot-com bubble, and the Agile Manifesto was written in 2001. So it's very interesting period what happened before this release, and what was the management then, and how people dealt with these problems.
I think that's a very interesting description of what was going on in the US in that time frame. It's true that the dot-com bubble was going on from about 1998 to about 2001. But I don't think that really had much to do with the Agile Manifesto. Most of the guys that signed the original Agile Manifesto were working in pretty traditional environments, like, doing consulting for insurance companies or automobile manufacturers, that kind of thing. My understanding at the time was not that the Agile Manifesto was a reaction to the dot-com bubble. It really was more of a reaction to this thing called the software capability maturity model that had been popularized by the Software Engineering Institute in the US. And this capability maturity model was really kind of, I think, the pinnacle, or in some ways the end of waterfall development, where the attempt was really to try to produce a really effective way of going about waterfall development. And, as with anything where you get toward the end of a cycle, it was quite elaborate and there were some excesses. And so I think when we saw implementations of the software CMM that hadn't worked very well, the main failure mode was excess bureaucracy. So too much management, too much process overhead. And my interpretation of the Agile Manifesto at the time, I knew at the time several of the people who were the original signers, and I know more of them today. But my take on it was that they really were reacting to the bureaucratic excesses of the software CMM. It's interesting that the dot-com bubble was happening at the same time, but I'm really inclined to view that more as a coincidence. I think, at the time, we weren't really talking back in 2001, even in the Agile context, we weren't really talking about continuous delivery. We were talking about delivery, maybe every 1 to 2 weeks, but the concept that we have now of pushing out software online every few hours, that kind of concept didn't even exist. I don't know that, that had even entered anyone's brain at that point in time.
Okay, if we look at these Agile Manifesto values, there are 12 of them. So, and one of these values sounds like this, that continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. So basically, there is a talk about competency, and the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So nowadays we have these companies where majority of the whole developers are juniors. So, and it seems like when we read this Agile Manifesto, it's written for more like senior developers. Basically, the guys who wrote it, they were like guys in age, I think.
Oh, I think that's completely right. I think every technique or every philosophy is going to have failure modes, and I think and it's also going to have blind spots. I think the blind spot for the software CMM was just this tendency that organizations have toward creeping bureaucracy, where bureaucracy begets bureaucracy. It just creates more bureaucracy. And so the success to waterfall implementation really is avoiding excess bureaucracy. I think the failure mode for Agile has been really kind of twofold. One is just a complete avoidance of any kind of systematic process, or at least that's what some of the words have said. I think the practice on the ground has been quite different. And then I think you're absolutely right that the people who created the Agile Manifesto were all not just very senior people, but they were also all very good at what they do. And so the idea that you put a bunch of guys in a room who are all really good at what they do, and you have them define what's going to work for everyone else, they have to be incredibly disciplined about avoiding their own blind spots, uh, to actually formulate something reasonable for other people to do. And my favorite example of this is refactoring, where the idea that you're going to start with some small architecture, like you read the Agile principle um, that said the best designs emerge basically, well, I don't think it's in the principle per se, but yeah, it's Agile Principle 11. The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing team. So there's this idea of emergent design. And I think, if you're Kent Beck or Martin Fowler, or Bob Martin, you have incredible intellect and incredible mind, and you are able to have an architecture emerge over time. And as you get 25% of the way to where you want to go and you realize things need to change, you have the mental ability to make those changes. And then when you get 50% of the way there and you realize you need to change it again, you have the mental ability to shift gears and make the revisions and change all the architecture as you go. And then you do it again at 75% and you keep doing it. Well, the amount of intellect required to make that happen is just, is huge. And so the idea that an average developer is going to be able to do that, I think is really, really optimistic. Of course, we would like to focus on skills and improving skills and making people get better, but the fact is, no matter how much we focus on it, a lot of people are going to hit a limit in what they're capable of. And so I think the idea that we should, plan from the beginning, to start from zero and then just emerge and iterate our way there on everything. I mean, it's a very idealistic idea. And, I will say, though, that the idea that we can sit there on day one and come up with a big design where we get all the details right on day one has all, just as many blind spots. That assumes a level of omniscience and intelligence on the part of experts that's not usually there either. There's a happy medium here where, we try to design as much as we can up front, at least the bold strokes up front, but we really don't try to design the numerous details because we know we're not going to get those right. We're going to learn as we go.
Okay, that's clear. In terms of age and experience, I'm quite young. So once I read this Agile Manifesto, it sounds more like some kind of rebellious counter movement to waterfall processes.
Well, the
It's
word
basically
manifesto sort of implies
that's
that, doesn't it?
that's what it is. So definitely there are uh, I like general experience. Like you definitely have more experience and more like insights than me. So
Yeah, and
but
I
the
and I
course,
would really differentiate between being young, which is really what you're saying is the amount of experience, versus being intelligent. I mean, you can have 1 year of experience and be the most intelligent person in the world, and that intelligence will carry you quite a ways. But some additional experience will also help. Similarly, you can have 20 years of experience and be of average intelligence, uh, and the experience will help. I don't even know if I would want to make a bet about whether I'd rather have the really smart person with 1 year of experience or the average smart person with 20 years of experience. I think that kind of depends on the nature of the project. If I'm doing something innovative that's groundbreaking, I probably would rather have the really smart person with 1 year of experience, recognizing that there will be mistakes made that people with more experience would avoid, but they may
yes.
be overall the rate of progress will be faster.
I fully agree on that. So basically talking about experience, uh, the question is how the best teams, in your, from your experience, collaborate. What are the main qualities of these groups? What are the things that they commonly share between each other?
Yeah. You know, I think to answer that question, I need to add one more point about this Agile Principle 11, which is really a general point. And that is when they say the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams, you know, the original focus of Agile was on small teams. And the original focus of the software CMM was on large teams. So they started out really not talking about the same issue. They were trying to solve different problems. And the software CMM was really trying to solve the problem of how do we avoid overly informal practices on large projects that are inappropriate for large projects. And Agile was really trying to solve the problem of how do we avoid overly bureaucratic and overly heavy processes that are just too much for small projects. So they were really trying to solve different things. And so when we talk about requirements architecture design emerging, we're really talking about a small project idea. And on a small project with, you know, smart enough people and maybe experienced enough people, this is not a completely ridiculous idea at all. It's, you know, if you, especially if you have people who have worked together for a long time. So now getting more specifically your question, what makes for a good team? If you have people who have worked together for a long time, you know, then you can take a lot for granted if you have a team that with, you know, 5 people, 7 people who have worked together for 2 or 3 years. You know, we call it tacit knowledge or tribal knowledge. You can just make a lot of assumptions.
That's clear, yeah. But
Yeah.
it seems like modern management is about empathy. It's, if you read these modern business articles, it seems like modern project management is about empathy, about moving forward, and we just do things. And it's very hard to find any metrics, any rules, and seems like nobody wants to enforce any policies. Like all the companies, they talk about values, they talk about like these high purposes and these kind of things.
Mhm.
And I think this comes from this agile like idea, generally speaking, where we just come together and we just do something, like
Yeah.
in the on the how hobbyists level, basically. So
Yeah.
the question is how we can generally measure developer performance and individual effectiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of measuring individual developer performance or effectiveness. And I've got, you know, I've given talks on this and written about it. I think that, you know, for any way that you come up to measure developer productivity, I'm going to show you, you know, 10 ways that it's going to fail and that it's going to give you anomalous results that uh, that really don't tell you what you need to know. You know, I go back to sports analogies on the topic of measuring developer performance, where people always want to come up with one number that somehow characterizes all of the ways a person contributes on a software team. And it's kind of a silly goal when you think about it. You know, if you think about sports, is there one number in any sport that would tell you who's the best player on a team or, you know, in that sport? You know, there's not one number. You know, hockey has the idea of plus minus. I
But the
think
question
that's
is the question is how we can reward how then we can reward the best performing individuals.
yeah.
So
So
because
that
the best performing individuals, they want to be monetarily rewarded. They
sure.
have their own aspirations. They have their own ego. They want to be first.
Hmm.
So from the one side, if we encourage the competition in this environment when only the best survives, eventually it creates another problem where like as we talk about sports about it's about competition, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And to be the best at sports, you have to gain some kind of advantage. And in what I see, for example, in IT world, is that the main advantage that programmers take is that they start to like hide information from each other. If one discovers one kind of tool, and if there's enough this competitive pressures, he will not check this tool. to the other developers.
Yeah,
So, and
I
also
have seen that.
there's
Uh,
also the opposite side where there's only team socialism and everybody's equal. So there's no competition. So basically, the best performance they will eventually leave.
yeah,
So where's this middle balance? How we can measure the best performing individuals while keeping them in the company?
yeah. Well, I think, I do think the way you described it is right. Software development is a team sport, and it's not helpful to have individuals on the team who are hoarding information, hiding good practices from each other. If they're acting that way, they are not treating software development like a team sport. Uh, Similarly, people do contribute in lots of different ways. You can have three people who are star programmers and have very high output, but who don't get along with each other. And you can have a fourth person whose role on the team is to be an average contributor in terms of how much code they write, but they're the person who actually keeps the other three people from killing each other. And so, as such, they actually are arguably the most important person on the team because it allows you to have all three of the really high output people instead of just one or two of them. So I think that's the kind of issue we get into when we talk about software development being a team sport. Now, there are teams out there where you have people who are super high contributors and who get along well with others. And that really is the ideal, is to have that kind of person. But I think your point about, if you treat the team as the unit and you never go below the level of the team and you never actually reward the people on the team who are standout contributors as such, then I think your idea that you've basically got socialism on your team and the best people leave, I think that's right. One of the great things about having a consulting company like I have is I get to talk to my clients, and I have some pretty smart clients, and I've learned a lot from them over the years. And one of my clients, who was a really successful guy who had done multiple successful startups, told me that you have to run your company for the benefit of your best employees. And he said, if you think about it, what's the alternative? And I think this is one of the wisest things I've ever heard is, what are you going to do? If you run your company for the benefit of the average employee, then your best employees are going to leave, as you said. You certainly are going to run your company for the benefit of the worst employees. So I think this is an important question for business owners to, and for that matter, team leaders to ask themselves is, am I running my company? Am I running my team for the benefit of the best people? Now, you can get into trouble if you don't define best the right way. If best means the guy who is a high output contributor but doesn't get along with others and is hoarding information, then the issue is not that you haven't run it for the benefit of the best people. It's that you defined best incorrectly. But I think the general idea of running the team or company for the benefit of the best contributors is an important idea.
So that means essentially we have to somehow measure the best individuals. We have to measure individual performance. So because as you said, like how we can know that this individual is the best, so that means there must be some kind of policies in place that basically restricts or establish a proper competition between
Yeah.
developers.
Yeah.
So okay,
And I
speak.
think that varies. I think that varies between companies. In sports, going back to the sports analogy, we've had different philosophies for winning teams, for decades. Probably 100 years now in some sports. In basketball, for example, we constantly have this argument about, do we really want to have one star player and build the team around this one star player, or do we want to have a team where we have really good players, but really the thing that makes the team great is that everybody works really well together? And I don't think it's clear that there's one right answer there. I think some years the best team is the one with the star player, and some years the best team is the one where everybody works together as a team. I will say that I think it's fairly rare that you have that one best player who's so much better than everybody else that it makes sense to build the whole team around them. Now, it's not
Michael
rare for someone to
Jordan.
think they're that good. There are lots of people who think they're that good, but it's rare for someone to actually be that good. And so I think in software, different companies define that differently. And I think it really is a job of the company to define in really clear terms, well, what does a really standout employee or team member look like here? As a company, are we emphasizing really good collaboration and and super high teamwork skills? Or as a company, are we really going to emphasize super high output, even sometimes at the expense of good collaboration skills? And personally, I would prefer to work in an environment where we have really good collaboration skills and I don't really have to deal with obnoxious personalities. But I can't sit here and say that's the only winning strategy. I've seen too many examples of companies that have done really well using the opposite approach. So, I don't think this is an area where there's one right answer. I think this is an area where a company needs to plant a stake in the ground, decide what kind of company it wants to be, and then do that. Not waffle about it, not change its mind every 3 months, but make a decision and then go. And that's a way to attract the people that you want to attract. I believe company cultures should be polarizing. They should attract the people you want, and they should repel the people that you don't want. And if you're lukewarm, that's not going to happen. So you try to create something distinctive. You don't try to please everyone, but what you do is you try to please the people that you do please a whole lot.
Okay, if we talk about agile, if we talk about agile context, so should senior developers do less work and more help junior developers? So how we can measure and evaluate the mentorship. So because I think it's one of the tools how we can balance all this thing out and do it properly.
Yeah.
So essentially there had to be some kind of measurements in place.
Yeah, I think senior developer doesn't necessarily mean good developer. So I think the question is really more about what should your highly capable developers be doing. If I've got a highly capable developer with 5 years of experience, they could easily have more overall capability than some senior developer with 20 years of experience. Beyond that, they could also easily have a much higher energy level and just a higher capacity for work. Um, One of the things that happens in software organizations is that if you have a young software organization and everybody is basically shortly out of college and they're single and they don't have family, they don't have spouses, they don't have kids, they don't have a house, they don't have a dog, they can really focus on work. Your ability to get a lot done when you're 25 years old and single is you're not going to return to that until much later in your life, and you've got a huge amount of physical energy to apply to it. Somebody with 20 years of experience, by then they've got a spouse and maybe they have a house and maybe they have kids and all the family issues. They could be just have a lot more experience, they could be just as smart as they were when they were 25, but the ability to apply personal energy to the project is not the same. And so, so I think, what do you do with that? Back to your question, what do you do with that? Do you put them in a contributor role? Do you put them in a mentoring role? I think it really comes down to what's the best use of that individual, where you're strongly considering what does that individual want to do. If you take somebody who really doesn't get anything out of mentoring and you try to make them mentor junior staff, I think that's just a recipe for annoying everybody, the mentor and the people they're mentoring. It's like pushing on a string. It's really hard to make someone do something that they really don't want to do. On the other hand, you do get lots of people who get to a point in their career where they really do want other people to benefit from their experience. And there, I think the real question is, is whether you want other people to benefit from their experience. Is their experience the kind of experience you want other people to learn from, or have they spent 20 years learning all the wrong lessons? And there are plenty of people who have spent 20 years learning all the wrong lessons. So, the fact that somebody is 45 years old doesn't necessarily mean that they have a lot to teach somebody who's 25 years old. It just kind of depends on the individual. So I do think, a classic mistake that organizations make is taking high output individual contributors and putting them into management positions that they don't really want to be in. And I think you hurt yourself in two ways when you do that. One is you deprive yourself of a high output contributor, and two is you give yourself a bad manager. And you ordinarily, if the person really doesn't want to do that, or doesn't have the aptitude for good management, then
It's
then
it's kind of
don't do
true
it.
what you say, but you have to understand that the modern web development and overall software development has been changed. For example, I don't want to communicate with clients. I don't want to estimate things. I just want to write code. But
Yeah.
eventually, I cannot do only this particular thing. I have to learn more skills and apply myself to many other like spheres, which I, for example, don't like. Or for example, do not feel comfortable speaking in front of the camera. I have to do it.
Yes.
So, and I think this argument is not quite right nowadays. So this is not the age where you can simply go into your cubicle, get rid of the society and just write code. So you have to learn how to take all this information and give it to the next developers. Because
Yeah.
if the
Yep.
senior developer doesn't know how to do it, there will be essentially the holes in the documentations, and there will be like very, for example, these long catch phases in project development where
Yeah.
the new guys come and they don't know what to do. Like
Yeah.
because these particular people who wrote this code, he's not anymore working in the company.
Yeah, I think this really does come down to looking at specific individuals. And I have a belief that as people get older, their world either gets bigger or it gets smaller. And as people get older and have more experiences, either they develop confidence where they say, yeah, I can do that. If something new comes along, that's exciting. I like learning new things and I like expanding my world. Or their experience tells them, no, new things are scary, and they're normally challenging and they don't feel good. And so I kind of settle into my comfort zone and I know what I'm good at, and that's all I'm going to do, and I don't really want to learn anything new. And I think that second worldview, as you said, is not a good match for technology. I think we're constantly getting new programming languages and environments to work in. And for somebody who's working in a mobile space today, that space basically didn't exist 15 years ago. So you really have to keep learning all the time. And by the time you get 20 years of experience, some people are still really excited about learning new things, and they get bored with doing the same thing. But some people are pretty locked into whatever they've been doing for the last 20 years. And so there are people out there that are still working in Fortran and COBOL and, really old languages, and are just hoping that the world doesn't, that their little piece of the world stays the same long enough for them to finish out their career without learning anything new. And, I think, there's a place for that. We do have aging systems and we need people to work on those aging systems. So I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but in terms of who you want mentoring younger staff, I think you want people who are a lot more eager to learn new things and open to new ideas. The last thing you want is somebody who sits there and talks about how we really had everything figured out 20 years ago and nothing new has happened in the last 20 years. And, really this new language is the same as some old language that was there 20 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. I think you want people who are excited about, the possibilities that are created with new technology and new tools and languages and so on.
Okay, let's move to the next topic. Let's move to the estimation. So you have the book, The Black Art of Estimation, basically.
Yes.
So, and it's actually the very interesting book. I read it, and what was the interesting about this book, that it had metrics and office politics inside. So this is very interesting thing why I picked up this book, and I want to ask you some questions. So we have this service in our company. It's called Support Cloud.
Okay.
So basically, it's one huge Kanban board. It's a Kanban board style management, and
is
there
that
are
is that online or is that a physical board?
it's OEG, physical board, where you
Okay.
can summon clients.
Okay.
So basically, you take basically you have one huge board with multiple projects, and developer can come to this board, take a ticket, and immediately start to communicate with client and give him some kind of estimate, for example, for the bug or to make some kind of feature.
Okay.
So what was the interesting thing in your book is that you had a chapter, as I said, politics, negotiation, and problem solving.
Okay.
So, and you wrote explicitly that developers are very good at estimation, but they are very poor at defending their estimates. So, and also the age of developers plays some kind of role, because younger developers, they don't know how to defend their estimates. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, we started talking about Agile, and I think that there was a pretty strong theme in Agile, or one of the motivations for Agile was essentially to avoid situations where developers even have to defend their estimates. I think one of the threads, not the only thread, but one of the threads in Agile was getting away from estimates because people were just uncomfortable talking about them. I think this is a growth area for a lot of developers. I think, one of the reasons that I think developers are bad at defending their estimates is that a lot of the estimates are not very good in the first place. And so, of course, it's difficult to defend an estimate that you yourself don't even really believe in. And so, I think one of the keys here is to develop the estimation skill so that developers do believe in their estimates. And I mean, they've actually got enough estimation skill that their estimates are worth something. And if you do believe in your estimate, you're going to have a pretty different conversation with somebody than if you don't believe in your estimate. If somebody starts pressing you on, well, why is it this way? Why is it so high? And you don't even believe in it yourself, then you're likely to cave in. If you've done a little bit of work on it and you have some decent estimation skills and you think that that's a pretty reasonable number, and somebody starts pressing you on it and saying, why is that so high? Then you just explain it to them. But you don't give up just because you didn't believe in it either. So I think developing some level of estimation skill is part of the solution. And that's really why I wrote that book. I'm glad to hear that you read it and thought that there were parts of it anyway that were still relevant. The interesting thing about that book is the vast majority of the estimation techniques in that book don't really have anything to do with software. They're, like proxy-based estimation is a general technique that doesn't have, anything to do with software per se. The idea of decomposing an estimate into parts and then building it back up doesn't have anything to do with software per se. And because of that, it also doesn't have anything to do with waterfall versus agile per se. It's a general technique that applies, many of those techniques apply just as well now as they applied 15 years ago. And, we haven't really talked about in this conversation, but the context here is that we're still in the middle of the pandemic, hopefully getting toward the end of the pandemic. And one of the things I've been doing is doing forecasting about the pandemic in the US. I'm contributing forecasts into the US Centers for Disease Control forecasting model. And I'm using the techniques I described in that estimation book. And my forecast model is one of the most accurate forecast models using those kinds of techniques. So, they worked fine in the waterfall era. They worked fine in the agile era. They worked fine for forecasting coronavirus. They're just generally useful estimation techniques. And it doesn't really take that long to learn the techniques, but there are, half of it is just learning what to avoid. Like, don't just kind of take 15 seconds and say, oh, I think it'll take me 2 days. That's a common failure mode. The off the cuff estimate or the gut estimate. There's in estimation, there's a big difference between a 15-second just kind of I think it's going to take 2 days estimate versus an estimate where you take 5 minutes and you go back to your desk and you look at your notes and you look at at the actual results for a couple of similar activities, and you refresh your memory about, well, how long did this other thing actually take? you wouldn't think there'd be a huge difference between a 15-second estimate and a 5-minute estimate, but there really is. I mean, one is essentially associated with poor estimates and overruns. The other is associated with actually being able to perform to your estimate. So, avoiding failure modes is a big part of estimating successfully. Doing a tiny bit of math is also a big component. And then grounding your estimate in your actual experience, not your casual memory of your actual experience, but your written down, recorded data on your actual experience. One of the peculiar things about estimation is that people's memories of their estimates are sometimes more vivid than their memories of the actuals. And so maybe you estimated something to take 2 days and it took 5 days. When you go to estimate the next thing and you think, oh, this seems similar to that last thing, sometimes people remember their estimate of 2 days instead of the actual 5 days. And so then they estimate 2 days again. And guess what? It turns out to be 5 days again. And so the idea that you go back and you look at your documented facts, how long the actual thing took, that's a key step in the process. So I don't know if that's really getting at what you were asking about. So maybe I should stop and give you a chance to ask again.
I'm listening. So estimating a project that is started, basically, if we build the project from the ground up and we estimate it, it's completely different thing if we are taking already built project that is under maintenance and we estimate these so-called microtasks. So the thing that I told before, that we had this huge Kanban board with all these different kinds of projects and all these different kind of microtasks. The question is the microtasking a good environment for junior developers? So, or should we place them on the projects that are built from the ground up, so they can work so they can work for longer time on one specific project, rather than we just throw them around and ask them to estimate these micro tickets on the projects which they don't have a clue about.
Yeah, can you clarify what you mean by a micro task? Is that like one person for an hour, or 2 people for a day, or 3 people for a week? How big would a micro task be?
Microtask is basically some kind of a bug, for example, in a site navigation, and I have to fix it. But for example, when I start to fix it, I find out that this navigation that's in the bug, that this bug that's is somewhere in the navigation, it's actually a much bigger problem, and I have to fix a whole parts of content management system. So it can go down pretty quickly. And these estimates, they sometimes they grow from 2 to 4 hours to 1 to 5 days.
Sure.
So that's the problem.
Yeah. So in general, I think having developers, I mean, it's kind of a mix. I think probably the least preferred way to help a new developer gain experience is putting them on a new large project and then having them work for a long time on that new large project. And the reason I say that is, what we really want to accomplish with new developers is we want to set up a feedback loop that allows them to do work and get feedback on it in as short a cycle as possible. And when we have a large project that may not be done for months and months, it really sort of denies them a feedback loop that helps them understand how they're doing. Now we can set up artificial feedback loops such as reviews and a senior person reviewing their work and that kind of thing, but it's not quite the same as the feedback of actually completing work and then getting that full cycle completed. Now, I think bug fixing on an existing large system might be a little bit better, but as you said, I think it has some challenges too, in that part of what's going on in that feedback loop is learning all the things that you don't know. So, as you said, it looks, as a junior person, it looks to you like this bug fix might take a couple hours because you think the scope is limited to a particular area. But then once you start working on it, there's a part of the system you didn't understand. And so then you learn, no, actually the root cause is not, this 2-hour thing I thought it was. The root cause is in this other part of the system. And now I've got to get up to speed on that, or maybe I've got to go get some help from someone else. And, so exactly like you said, what you thought was 2 hours turns into 2 days and maybe involves two people instead of one person. All that said, the feedback loop is still shorter. And there's some good learning that can occur that way. In an ideal world, and I think this goes back to one of the real strengths of Agile development, with a small team and short release cycles, I get really, really good feedback in that kind of a setup. If I'm doing, if I'm doing Scrum with a 2-week development cycle, I get feedback every 2 weeks at least, if not more often than that, on how my plans worked, how my estimates work, did I complete all my work when I thought I was going to. 2 weeks is a reasonable feedback loop. I'm not going to complain about having a feedback loop that long. 2 months, that's starting to get to be kind of long. A year, that's way too long. But 2 weeks is okay. And of course, there'll be feedback loops inside that 2 weeks too, as I estimate individual tasks and I stand up in my daily stand up and say, either I got that done or not. Now, if you've got a Kanban board where people are pulling tasks off the Kanban board, then that presumably normally gives you much quicker feedback than 2 weeks. Like you said, it's maybe a few hours or a day or two. So I definitely like the sound of that. The thing that people don't do, though, that I think can be a good role for a senior developer to play, if they even do it themselves, is making sure that a person closes the loop on the feedback. An awful lot of people do the work and then it takes longer or something went wrong. But what they don't do is reflect on their experience and learn from it. So closing the loop. And, in my book, More Effective Agile, I talk about the principle of inspect and adapt. And the inspect part is really important. You have to look at it, see what happened, understand what happened. And then after you understand what happened, then you can adapt and change course. But that's that loop of going through the endless loop of always inspect and adapt is really a recipe for learning. It's a recipe for getting better as a professional. But a surprising number of people don't close the loop. They actually don't reflect on their experience. They just sort of shrug it off. Oh yeah, I thought that was going to be 2 hours. It took 2 days. Huh. Okay. And they don't learn anything from it. They should learn a lot from it. Sometimes it takes somebody, maybe that person's you, I don't know, but it takes
it's
somebody
actually
sitting down with them.
okay. It's actually a basic principle about writing things down and collecting the metrics, some kind of metrics or numbers from the previous project.
Yeah.
So majority of developers, they do not write things down. Majority of them doesn't know how to document things. So they are basically writing if-else statements and Boolean logic. So as I said previously, is that developers, as you wrote in your book, developers are very bad at defending their estimates. So the question is, where does the professional estimators and professional project managers fit in Agile methodology if the introverted developers are running the scene?
Yeah. Well, so I think there are, there are at least two different kinds of estimation practices that apply in different contexts. For the big board that you described, which are the micro tasks that you described, we're really talking about micro level estimates that really are appropriately estimated by individuals. And really they're appropriately estimated by the individuals who are going to be doing the work. And so that really is one kind of estimate. When you're estimating a whole project, or you have a client who comes in and says, this is the kind of functionality I want, what's it going to cost me? How long is it going to take to give me this big chunk of functionality? That really is it's still an estimate, but it's not the same activity as the activity of estimating that micro task. That estimate for the whole project kind of thing, that is something where you would want somebody who has estimation skill in estimation per se, not just in estimating their own work, but in doing larger level estimates. And much of my book is about that topic. Some of my book is about the individual, helping the individual improve their micro level estimation skills. And much of it is about how that somewhat more difficult estimation challenge of estimating larger chunks of work.
Okay. How I understand is that these microtasking environments, they are, I think, better suited for professional developers, so that can write code and live under pressure.
Mhm.
And these kind of environments are not meant for junior developers. So junior developers essentially should participate in the projects that are built from the ground up. So yeah. Uh,
Yeah, the junior developers need to learn how to improve their personal estimation skills too, though. And there's a transition. You don't just flip the switch and go from junior to senior. So I think it's important to
yeah, it's
provide the
true.
experiences that transition the person.
So in your book, you had a very interesting thing. There was a quote. Actually, it was the book. It was chat. It was the title of the chapter. So negotiating an estimate versus negotiating a commitment.
Yeah.
These are two different things.
Yep.
So can you please explain to our listeners what are the differences between estimates, targets, and commitments?
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. And in many organizations don't have an estimation problem per se. They have a negotiation problem or a commitment problem. So an estimate is an analytical prediction of how long something will take or how much functionality you can produce in a given amount of time. It's kind of a calculation or a mathematical operation. Um, but estimates by their nature involve uncertainty. An estimate's not a pinpoint thing where this is going to take me 180 minutes exactly. If I say something's going to take 3 hours, what I'm really saying is, well, if I get lucky, I might get it done in 2 hours. If I uncover some stuff that's unexpected, it might take me 2 days. But from where I sit now, my best guess is it's going to take me 3 hours. But there's some variability around that. And as such, it's an analytical prediction. A commitment is just basically saying, I'm going to get this done by the close of business tomorrow. And it might take me 2 hours, in which case I'll be done today. I might have to work all night on this to meet my commitment of getting it done by close of business tomorrow. But the commitment is saying, I'm gonna perform to some standard. I'm going to deliver by a date. I'm going to produce certain functionality, that I promised to produce. A commitment is really more of a promise. It's not a calculation. It's not an analytical assessment of anything. And I think a lot of organizations confuse estimates and commitments. The senior management will go ask a developer, how long do you estimate this will take? And the developer will say, or the team will say, we think we can get that done in 2 weeks. And so the management says, okay, good, then, get it done in 2 weeks. And the team wasn't saying, we promised to get it done in 2 weeks, but somehow in that conversation, it got turned into a promise to get it done in 2 weeks. And so, I think just the vocabulary, getting the terms straight, where you understand what's an estimate, what's a commitment, and then clarifying that can be super helpful in conversations where, in that scenario I just described, if the team says, we think it'll take about 2 weeks, and the senior manager says, okay, we'll expect that to be done in 2 weeks. And the team can say, hey, wait a minute, we were estimating that it would take 2 weeks, but there's some variability there. It's possible we'll get it done sooner, but it's also possible that it'll take longer. If you want a commitment for when we guarantee you that we'll be done, the commitment would be more like 3 weeks. And we think we'll get it done faster, but the estimate and the commitment are not the same thing. And we've seen organizations benefit tremendously just from separating those two concepts and recognizing that an estimate and a commitment are two different things. And as I said in the book, and as you've quoted a couple of times today, the estimates are often pretty good, but what's broken is the commitment process. And so something gets lost in the translation from the estimate to the commitment. And that's really something that organizations can work on. Now, because estimates are variable and there's some uncertainty implied in estimates, there's no necessary relationship between the estimate and the commitment. The commitment can be conservative relative to the estimate. It can be aggressive relative to the estimate. But now we're going to have a business discussion about how much risk do we want to take on? How hard do we want the team to work? Is this important enough that we're willing to burn out the team to get there? Or is it just kind of really more business as usual, where we should have the agile idea of sustainable pace and keep our team healthy, keep them ready to work on the next project or the next assignment. Um, and if the commitment process is broken in such a way that it burns out the team on some mundane assignment that's no more important than any other work the team's ever going to get assigned, then that's a damaging thing for the organization. We don't want a burnt out team. We want a team that's ready to go day after day, week after week. And so good estimation definitely helps because it helps inform what kind of commitment is reasonable to make. And sometimes we see really aggressive commitments made that people didn't understand were aggressive because the estimates were bad. They thought it was an average commitment, but it turned out to be super aggressive because in fact the estimates were optimistic and not very accurate. So there's definitely a relationship between estimates and commitments, but I think it's one where good estimation informs the commitment process. And most organizations, at the end of the day, most organizations don't really want estimates. They want commitments. And so, when I talk to developers, I say, look, when your sales and marketing people ask you for an estimate, make sure you understand what the words mean. They might use the word estimate, but what they're probably really asking you for is a commitment. So don't just be overly literal about that because they use the word estimate, and assume that when you give them some number that has some variability associated with it, that they're going to interpret that as an estimate. No, they're very likely to interpret it as a commitment. So have the conversation, use those words, say, are you asking me for an estimate that we might or might not perform to? Or are you asking me for a commitment where we're going to guarantee that we're done, with this functionality? And then, clarify the terminology. Make sure you know what question you're answering. People get into lots of problems by answering a question they thought someone was asking, but it wasn't really the question they were asking.
Yes, everything is good until the big numbers are introduced. There's this psychological phenomenon, how I can tell that. So when we are dealing with some kind of small bugs, small features, we are usually using these so-called multi-point estimates. For example, yes. To fix this bug, we use 2 to 4 hours. To fix this or adjust this feature, we will need 8 to 16 hours, 1 to 2 hours, and so on. Mm-hmm. So, but the trickiest part starts when you have to estimate a whole project. When this estimation, it goes from 4 to 8 months, mm-hmm. 1 to 2 years. So here's the interesting thing. So, and when it starts to, like, when we came to these big numbers, project managers usually choke. So it's a very interesting thing. So, and in your book, you had a whole chapter how we can communicate these estimates to the clients, mm-hmm. using statistical probabilities. Yeah. And if I understand it correctly, I'm not quite experienced, but this is a thing that I read. There's this cone of uncertainty.
Yes.
So, and we are frequently estimating the project until we get to this final deadline, and we are communicating these estimates that we figure out statistically to the client. So can you explain more this concept?
Yeah, I think this goes.
And also, I should mention the fact that this goes together with this confidence as the final deadline comes closer and closer. So the confidence goes up.
It can go up if you play your cards right. Yeah, it's not guaranteed to go up. So, I think the first question is your client even asking for an estimate, or are they really asking for a commitment? If you're working with a new client, I think it's extremely rare that they want what I would call an estimate. I think they probably are asking for a commitment. if you're working with a client that you have a trusted relationship with, and you're able to sit down with them and you're able to show them something that's more probabilistic, or show them a range of outcomes and say, look, this is where we think it's going to come out, but, and we have put some work into it. It's not just a guess, but, the nature of the work is there's some variability associated with it. So we think it's going to come out here, but it might come out over here. Are you okay with that? In a trusted relationship, maybe they are okay with it. But I think in a early relationship where you haven't developed that trust yet, they're probably looking for more like a commitment that you're going to perform to a particular date. And so in that situation, you're still going to estimate, but your estimate is for your own internal purposes to help you understand where you want to make the commitment. And then the commitment in that case really is more of a business decision than a software technical decision. If you're going to say, look, we want, your business might say, look, we want a 75% chance of performing to the estimate. Otherwise we're just going to have to, eat up the extra costs on our own. We're not going to get paid for the overrun. And so just to be able to have a profitable business, we set our commitment at the 75% likely level of the estimate, or the 90% likely level of the estimate. That could be a business decision. Similarly, if your business says, look, we really need the work right now. We would rather have, work where we possibly lose money than to have no work where we lose everything. The business might say, okay, we'll set the level at 25% likely. We probably will overrun, but at least we'll get some work. And, and the client will get a really good deal because, we underestimated it. But it's more important to us right now to have the work, even if we have it at a loss, than to have no work, which would actually be a bigger loss. So, and I think technical people, software people, you really have to talk to them about that sort of reasoning, because they generally don't understand the idea that the commitment, there can be very rational reasons for having the commitment to the client be different than whatever their estimate was. And, and also they need to be a little bit humble too about the fact that they're not perfect estimators. It's okay to remind them that, hey, your guys' estimation track record is not perfect. And so we understand there are some error bars around these estimates, and we need to plan the business accordingly. And so I think it just kind of depends on what your relationship with your client is. I do think that the scenario where you're doing estimates for an external client is actually the most difficult estimation scenario there is, just because you don't have as much room to maneuver with an external client, especially depending on how your contract is structured. If you estimate too high, you maybe don't get the work at all. If you estimate too low, you lose money when you do the work. So the stakes are higher in this situation than maybe any other software estimation situation. But here too, I think being really clear about what is the estimate, what is the range of estimates for your internal analysis versus what is the commitment, which is a separate idea. I think that can be tremendously helpful to the business, because now the business is making a conscious decision about, well, how much risk are we going to take on? How much do we want a guarantee of profit versus, a likelihood of profit? Those are two different things, right? A guarantee of profit versus a likelihood of profit. And actually, I would say, given the realities of bidding on external work, I don't think you can solve this problem one project at a time. I don't think there's a scenario where you can make, 20% profit on every single project. I really think that for this kind of environment, it's actually more useful just to think of it as a portfolio of projects. Think of it as an investment portfolio where you're going to make money on some projects, you're going to lose money on some projects. What's important is that the portfolio overall be profitable. And that allows you to deal with the reality that if you bid too high, you lose the work. If you say, I have to make money on every single project, you're going to bid too high on every single project, and you're going to lose the work because your bids will always be too high. Similarly, if you say, we have to win every single project, you'll probably bid too low on every project, and then you'll never make any money. But if you say, look, our goal is we're going to make money, we're going to make a profit on 2/3 of our projects, and we know we're going to lose money on 1/3, but the portfolio overall will be profitable. That sort of approach can allow you to set your bids at a level where you can win the work and be profitable, not 100% of the time, but most of the time at a project level, um, and then be profitable overall at the company level. But as I said, I just want to acknowledge, I think this is an especially challenging estimation context, and that distinction between commitment and estimate is really especially useful in this context.
Okay, there is also in your books under not at under all chapters, but at some of them you had these pro tips. So one of these pro tips was that we should treat estimation discussions as a problem solving, not
Yep.
negotiation.
Yep.
So and we should recognize that all project stakeholders are on the same side of the table.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone, basically, the idea is that everyone wins or everyone loses.
Yeah.
So it sounds nice, but how we can instill this idea, how we can educate our clients in this problem-solving negotiation into
Yeah.
like
So
this.
that comment is really about the circumstance where the estimates are for internal use, where a company is estimating for its own purposes. If the exception to that, I think, is the scenario that we were just talking about. When you're doing work for external clients, then I don't think you're truly on the same side of the table. I think there is some negotiation involved. But I think here what we want to negotiate is still the commitment, not the estimate. The estimate we're going to develop for our internal purposes. We want to be clear inside our own organization what the estimate is, and then given the information about what the estimate is, then the sales staff or the business leaders can negotiate the commitment that makes sense. But there I think we truly are negotiating. It's not just problem solving, because our interests are not aligned. If we're estimating all for internal purposes in our own company, then inside our company, if the project overruns and fails to meet commitments, it's disruptive to the whole company. The company is what loses money. It really is either win-win or lose-lose. And so we have an interest in treating it as problem solving and making sure that the whole company wins. But if you're talking about an external contract with an outside organization, then it can be win-lose. It's not necessarily win-win. We would like to try to approach it that way, but truly it might be something where their benefit is at the expense of our loss. So that advice may not apply in your particular circumstances. I think internally, I think you still want to treat the estimation process as problem solving, but externally, I think that you clearly there's some negotiation involved.
Mm-hmm. There's also another idea that I found in this book, that your most powerful negotiating ally in estimate discussions is not your estimate. It is your ability to generate planning options that non-technical stakeholders have no way of knowing about. So
that's right.
And it sounds right, but how we can teach this approach to junior project managers? And this literally, it seems like this is the thing that you can gain only through the experience and over a long period of time.
Yeah, I agree. I do think this kind of brings us back to our original topic of more experience versus less experience. So sometimes younger people are plenty creative and can generate options, but senior people have seen more and so may just be more aware of what general options exist. But I think in estimation discussions, and I think the context we're talking about now, just to make it clear for people who are listening, is the context where people are unhappy with the estimate. The number's too big, or you can't deliver by the desired timeline, or you can't deliver the functionality with the resources that are available. Um, so that's the context, just to be sure everybody understands that. So what do you do from estimation purposes in that context? And I do think I continue to believe 15 years later that generating options for the other party to think about or consider really is a powerful thing to do. Um, and I think there are two reasons for that. One is that I continue to be astonished at how little understanding non-technical people have of what's possible or what's difficult in software. A lot of times, their evaluation of what is difficult is just whatever looks the easiest or the simplest or the most straightforward. And we know on the technical side, a lot of times the most work is in making something look easy or simple or straightforward. And so we have a real mismatch there. So just helping them understand, you know, look, if we do this in 2 steps instead of 1 step, we can cut our cost in half. They're not going to know that. So we have to actually explain that kind of thing to them. So one thing that happens is we generate options, and they might actually like one of the options. I've had numerous experiences where the person on the other side of the table will say, "Oh yeah, we don't care if that's easier. Do it that way. We don't, we just wanted to describe something. We don't care if you do it the way we originally described." So that turns out to be an easy conversation. Um, so part of it is we might generate an option they actually like. The other part of it is the more options we throw out, the clearer it is that we're trying to help them solve the problem. And, part of it is thinking of ourselves as being on the same side of the table, but the other party's also got to think that we're all on the same side of the table. And sometimes they don't think that. Sometimes they view us as an adversary. But the more we make it apparent that we're actually trying to help, then the more they see we're on the same side of the table. And then we all treat it as problem solving. And then that becomes a good thing and an easier conversation. And whereas I think developers tend not to like negotiation, developers do tend to like problem solving. And so, and it just feels good if we can sit down with the other party and they start out being dissatisfied and we can generate ideas and they walk away satisfied, that's a pretty good day.
This one is maybe out of context, but there is also a point. We should insist that the estimate we should insist that the estimate is prepared by the qualified party.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a couple lines in your book that you are repeating this sentence. So, and my question is about this qualified party. If we talk about the developers, does that mean that the estimate should be qualified by a project manager or other experienced developers?
Yeah. So that's back to it. It depends on the type of the estimate, and the qualified party is not the same in all circumstances. If you're talking about the micro tasks that we were talking about a while back, then the developer who's going to be doing the work is the qualified party. The project manager is not the qualified party in that case because the task is too small. It depends too much on the specific skills of the individual who's assigned the work. And so the project manager in that context is the unqualified party. The developer who's going to do the work is the qualified party. If you're talking about estimating a whole project that's, let's say, 3 months long, in that context, the project manager might very well be the qualified party, and the individual developer might be the unqualified party. So, and that's just due to the difference in the nature of the estimate.
I think we should finish this episode. And what I can ask you, what are you working right now? Are you writing some kind of a new book, maybe? What are your next steps in life?
Well, yeah, so thanks for asking. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've spent quite a bit of time during the pandemic on forecasting COVID. I have learned quite a bit about software estimation from the COVID forecasting. As with other things I've done in life, I try to learn software lessons from other activities I'm engaged in. And initially, I wasn't really seeing a lot of parallels between the COVID forecasting and software estimation. But as time has gone by, I've seen more and more parallels and some really surprising ones, actually. So part of what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out what to do with all that COVID forecasting experience. It's not really directly relevant to software, but hopefully there's something in there that will benefit software. My company is going through a pretty significant transition now. The move to virtual has been an interesting one. We've been doing mostly in-person training. And so since we're based in the US, training in Europe has been like not a really, we've done some, but not a lot of it. The travel becomes very expensive and, the time zone changes are difficult to work with. But as the whole world has gone more virtual, and I think that's going to stay after the pandemic is over, not 100%, of course, but I think we'll be a lot more open to virtual. Um, our company is in the process of really trying to shift to virtual training mode. And I think that's going to open up opportunities to do training in, Europe as well as North America and potentially other locations. It's interesting when you're doing training in person, you typically do it as whole day units, like, 1 day, 2 day, 3 days at a time. But virtually nobody has the capacity to be online for a whole day. So you're doing it a couple hours at a time. Um, and so when you're only looking for a couple hours at a time, just like this podcast, it's a lot easier to find a couple hours that work across different time zones. And so, that opens up some possibilities. And then, like, one of the things that's really tough to do with professionals is just pull them out of their work environment for whole days at a time. Companies don't like to lose that kind of output. But there too, if we shift to a couple hours at a time, maybe a couple days a week, makes it a lot easier for the company to say, okay, yeah, we'll do the training because we're not really losing entire days of output. So, and then we can also interleave hands-on experience with more classroom lecture stuff. So there's can be a lot more application and feedback. We talked about feedback a lot today. And training, that's really important too, is getting the experience and then asking about the experience, learning the right lessons. So virtual actually opens up some really cool prospects from a training point of view uh, that we didn't have when we were doing it as in-person full days at a time. So that's really what we're focusing on right now, and we'll be making some announcements on that within the next few weeks. And so yeah, my work is not really on book writing right now. It's just more on other kinds of things that are software practice related.
Okay, what I can say? Maybe do you have any questions for me from
Well, I think
about this company?
it's been a very, very nice conversation. I like the questions you ask. I think I like this topic of intersection between estimation and agile. I think these are very good questions. And estimation has, despite the claims of some of the people in the agile world, estimation clearly has not gone away because of agile, for all the reasons that you described. And I think another thing that we are seeing as a company is many organizations are doing some sort of hybrid agile development. It's a hybrid of agile and waterfall. It's not 100% agile. It's certainly not 100% waterfall. It may be a pretty small percentage of waterfall, but we're seeing a lot of companies kind of apologizing for hybrid approaches. And I just think that's completely unnecessary. They shouldn't be apologizing for it. It's actually a very intelligent and rational adaptation of Agile. It's like, use the parts that make sense. And if there's a part that isn't working for your organization, then yeah, make an adaptation. And so that's another thing that I think my company, that I personally and my company are going to start being a lot more vocal about, is just the idea that it's okay to have a hybrid approach. And by the way, if you have a hybrid approach, you're not alone. Most of the companies we talk to are doing some kind of hybrid approach, but they're like treating it as if it's shameful and they don't want to admit to anyone else that they're doing it. But we've talked to so many companies that are doing it, it's not uncommon. It seems to be much more the norm than the exception. And so I think really coming to terms with this idea that 100% agile or go home, there's no middle ground, it has to be all or nothing, just doesn't make sense. And I think a growing number of companies realize it doesn't make sense. I'm not sure those companies are being served very well by a a lot of the consultants who are out there these days who are saying, no, 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 it has to be 100% agile or nothing. Well, I don't think that's a very engineering orientation. So we're definitely working with more and more companies on the topic of blending agile and maybe a little bit of waterfall. There's tremendous value in agile practices, but it wasn't that there was zero value in waterfall practices. There was some, and so recapturing the parts that were good, I think, is something that's worth focusing on now that we've had enough experience with agile to kind of understand what it can do, but also what it can't do.
Okay, thanks for coming. This is definitely a very valuable discussion. And yeah, so basically we are ending here. We are ending this podcast episode. I want to tell everybody who is here, actually many people, and thank you for listening. So thank you, Steve, for participating, and see you in the next episodes.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Right.